Okay, let us commence. And I thought we'd start with a little bit of an introduction to what is clinical toxinology. So some definitions. What is toxinology? It's the science of toxic substances such as venoms and poisons produced by living organisms. Now that's the key part of this. It deals with substances produced by living organisms. It's not pharmaceuticals, it's not chemicals, etc. And that could include snakes, spiders, jellyfish, mushrooms, plants, etc. So toxins are substances produced by living organisms, and that includes bacteria that cause harm when introduced into animals. For venomous animals, toxins are a component of their venom, and they're used to help them acquire prey, to digest their prey, or to defend against predators. And it's that last bit, defending against predators, that often brings them into contact with humans in an adverse manner. Uh-oh. For poisonous animals and plants, toxins are ingested when the organism is eaten, then causing harm to the organism. So what is clinical toxinology? Clinical toxinology is that area, specialist area of medicine, both human and veterinary, dealing with the understanding, the diagnosis and the treatment and prevention of illness caused by these toxic substances in snake venom, in scorpions, in spiders, etc. So what sort of information, what sort of knowledge should a toxinologist have? They need to be a medical doctor. They need to understand a whole range of things in the medical area. They need to have an understanding of the fauna and flora, an understanding of the toxins, an understanding of what clinical effects those toxins can cause, an ability to use the above information in a diagnostic process, and knowing how to treat someone who is affected by these toxins. Obviously a course like this, even our full Adelaide course, doesn't make you a clinical toxinologist, but anyone dealing with toxinology type problems like snakebite, as you do in this country, needs to have an understanding at least of those bits of clinical toxinology that affect how you approach a patient with snakebite. So there are a number of major groups of toxin-producing organisms. There are venomous animals, and there are many of these on land. There are snakes, scorpions, spiders, ticks, insects, centipedes. In Australia we have the platypus. In other parts of the world we have shrews. In the marine environment there are many marine organisms that produce toxins, including jellyfish, stinging fish, etc. But we mustn't forget that a number of organisms, both animals and plants and mushrooms, also have toxins in their body, so that if you eat part of that animal, you can become poisoned by these toxins. So on land particularly, that it can apply to some of the amphibians. There are other examples, but amphibians are probably the most important. But it's particularly in the sea that there are problems. And so we have the marine poisonings, the really common ones like fugu, which is a tetrodotoxin poisoning, ciguatera, and scomboid. And there are also many types of shellfish poisoning. Now, today's course is not going to go through any of these issues, but my guess is that at least some of the people in eating fish from the sea, working in the marine environment, may be affected by these problems in your country. Also, we have poisonous plants and mushrooms and bacteria, but bacterial toxins are very common. They're a major cause of illness in humans, but they are not dealt with by people like me. As a clinical toxinologist, I don't deal with bacterial toxin illness. That is, we leave to infectious disease specialists to microbiologists. So what about that diversity of fauna? This shows some of the major phyla, subphyla and classes of animals which contain one or more species that produce toxins. Starting at the most primitive with the sponges, then going on to the cnidarians, the things like the jellyfish, and there are several different types of jellyfish including hydrozoans, the sea anemones, etc. And some of these can produce lethal toxins that can kill humans. Not so much in the waters around Myanmar, but in other parts of the world. Then we have the mollusks, and they include the octopuses. In Australia, at least, we have potentially deadly octopuses. The snails, and cone snails in particular, are widely distributed. And the various bivalves, which are important in terms of shellfish poisoning. Then we have the vast group, the arthropods, and in particular mentioning crabs, the spiders and scorpions, very, very important globally. Then we have, maybe less important from a medical point of view, the millipedes, the centipedes, and lastly, of course, the insects, also very, very important. Then there are the echinoderms. These are not likely to kill by and large, but they certainly produce potent toxins. And lastly, what we would sometimes refer to as the higher animals, the chordates, the vertebrates, the cartilaginous fish, things like stingrays, the many types of bony fish, the poisonous bony fish, things like fugu, ciguatera, the venomous bony fish, things like the butterfly cod, the stonefish. Then we have amphibians, a number of which produce very potent toxins in their skin secretions, the poison arrow frogs, the poison dart frogs of South America, for instance. The reptiles, and we're going to spend the rest of the day just talking about reptiles. All the rest I'm mentioning now, but the rest of the day will be just talking about snakes. And there are birds which have toxins in New Guinea, and a few mammals which are venomous. Like the platypus in Australia, the male platypus has a spine on its leg, rear leg, which it can use to envenom. So the ones I've just highlighted here are those which contain one or more species that cause major and sometimes fatal problems in humans. And you can see that ranges from the most primitive all the way down through to the reptiles. So now we shall move on to snakes. Now, I'm sure you all recognize that as a cobra. So snakebite is a very important problem in toxinology globally. More people are affected, severely affected by snakebite than any other type of toxin. We don't have precise figures for snakebite worldwide, but there are some estimates. We are fairly certain that the number of people bitten by venomous snakes is in the millions every year. We don't know exactly how many, but some of you may be familiar with this paper from 2008 by Kasturiaratne et al. And this paper estimated a lower level of bites and deaths from snakebite than some of the previous studies. We now think that this study was severely flawed and has underestimated numbers. Again, for deaths, SHPO estimated at least 125,000 snakebite deaths every year in the world, whereas Kasturiaratne suggested it may be as low as 20,000. They're wrong. We know that in India alone, we have reliable data from India now. There are at least 45,000 people dying from snakebite every single year. More than 1 million people worldwide suffer disability, long-term disability as a result of snakebite. WHO estimates there are around 400,000 patients receiving amputations from as small as the tip of a finger to as large as a whole leg or arm as a result of snakebite. To put that in perspective, that is nearly 10 times the number of amputations per year as those caused by landmines. In some regions, snakebite occupies a large percentage of hospital beds. And you know that. In your own hospital, the hospital we stand in now, we know that snakebite is the predominant reason for people to be here with acute renal failure. Snakebite is or has been among the top 10 causes of death in some parts of the world, and that includes your country. The total global cost from snakebite is enormous, and we have to ask the question, if this is a neglected tropical disease, why is it the most neglected of all neglected tropical diseases? There is a need to change the attitude at the World Health Organization level, and we certainly are involved in trying to do just that. So is this a problem which is going to disappear as you become a wealthier, more modern nation? The current evidence suggests the answer to that is no. In a number of regions, venomous animals are adapting to urban and modern urban habitats. There are some species successfully exporting to other parts of the world, and unfortunately the ability to treat envenoming with antivenom is declining in some areas, particularly in Africa. In the Western world, there's an increasing trend to keep exotic venomous animals as pets, and they also can cause problems. So before I move on to a discussion of snakes in particular, are there any questions of me about what I've just presented? If that's all clear. So later today we will talk about specifically the snakes of your country, of Myanmar. This session, this particular lecture, is about snakes in general, so that you understand something about the basics of snakes. Snakes appear to have evolved from a lizard ancestor many, many millions of years ago. And one way of thinking of snakes is as a form of legless lizard. But it's important to understand that in some parts of the world there are true lizards which are not snakes, but which also have no legs. We don't absolutely know how venomousness evolved in snakes or any other organism. But there is one theory which has been put around the world in the last 5 to 10 years, which the people that have suggested it have now said this is the truth. And it's important, I think, for you to understand that they are not correct. They have suggested that this toxifera group hypothesis suggests that all venomous snakes originated from a single original ancestor. However, more research has gone on which essentially has substantially disproved this idea. We think that venomousness has arisen a number of times separately in different snake groups. So why have snakes evolved these venoms? Animals evolve their shape, their function, based on an advantage for that animal. Darwin's theory of natural selection. So what things can venom bring to the snake to help the snake? It can assist it in acquiring its prey. And so it may be designed to kill the prey quickly. So they need to be potent toxins. That might be a paralyzing toxin. It might be a toxin that causes bleeding or clotting. It might be that the venom can help the snake more rapidly digest its prey, to help break down the tissues. We can imagine that toxins designed to do that in the prey may have a different effect when they bite a human. They cause local tissue damage at the bite site. And lastly, they're a defense against predators. But for most snakes, this is the least important use of that venom. For us, however, it is the only really important use of that venom, because this is where we interact with the snakes, getting bitten, getting envenomed, and all the risks and problems that then follow. How many of you here have actually treated a snakebite patient? Put your hand up. Come on, I'm sure lots of you have actually treated snakebite patients. Surely more of you have seen. How many of you have seen a snakebite patient where you've been working as a doctor? Come on, hands up if you've... I would bet most of you have. I think you're being shy. So glands producing venom are found in snakes from some, but not all families. They can be associated with a very clear delivery mechanism and modified teeth, what we call fangs, and clearly associated with an offensive capacity to help capture prey. But there's another group of snakes that have a different gland, are found across a range of different snakes. And these glands, this is a high pressure gland. It can help push that venom out rapidly through the fang, lots of venom into the victim. This is a low pressure gland. It can't produce as much venom, get as much venom into the victim carefully. And a number of snakes with this sort of gland may not have proper fangs. A few of them do, and those fangs tend to be towards the back of the mouth, what used to be called back-fanged venomous snakes. Now you may think, well, that's not important to me in Myanmar. It's these snakes which I have to deal with. It's Russell's vipers and Cobras and Kraits, and they're all in this group. But you actually have a number of snakes in this group. And at least one of the snakes in this group, in your country, produces a venom which can kill people. So, most textbooks still talk about the old taxonomy of snakes. And amongst the venomous snakes, they list these major groups. The colubrid snakes, which includes the back-fanged snakes. The elapid snakes, which are the cobra type snakes with a fang at the front of the mouth, which can't rotate much. The atractaspids. Who here has heard of an atractaspid snake, apart from Inhan, who went to Adelaide for the course? No one. I thought not. This snake is only found in parts of Africa and the Middle East, so we don't need to worry about it today anymore. And lastly, the vipers. And you certainly need to worry about vipers in your country. They have large fangs on a mobile maxilla that can fold away against the roof of the mouth. There are two groups of vipers, the classic viper and the more advanced pit vipers, or heat-sensing pit vipers. And I'll mention that a bit further later. So, before talking about the cobras and the vipers, I want to just spend a little bit of time on this group which gets forgotten about, the non-front-fanged colubroid snakes. It's a term that we recently coined to describe this diverse group of snakes, and some have modified teeth, fangs, which tend to be towards the middle or back of the mouth, and some don't have any fangs at all. They have these low pressure glands secreting venom, but the venom can sometimes be very toxic. Most of them don't cause problems for humans, but there are a few that do, and I'll come to those shortly. This is the current taxonomy of snakes. It looks complicated. It is complicated. I'm giving you this information so that you are aware that it exists, but do you need to remember all this for your day-to-day medical practice? No, you do not. So the non-front fanged colubroid snakes include snakes in a variety of families. And one particular group which is important to you here, as you'll learn, is this group down here, the nitricid snakes of the genus Rhabdophis. The front fang venomous snakes of the Cobra family, Elapidae, and the vipers are much more limited, as you can see here. So again, this colubroid, the non-front fanged snakes, they have a wide range, including right throughout Asia. There are many species here. These are some of the species that are known to cause problems in humans, and you will see this throughout the rest of the day in my lectures, that some of the lines of writing are grey, whereas only some are in the full black. The ones that are in grey are not relevant to your country. So the only species that's relevant to Myanmar is this one, the redneck keelback Rhabdophis subminiatus. They possess modified venom-injecting teeth at the front of the mouth. So now we're moving on to the vipers, the elapids, etc. These are the front fang venomous snakes. We have the selenoglyphs that have rotating maxilla, things like the rattlesnakes, the green pit vipers, etc. And then you have the proteroglyph snakes, which are things like the cobras, where the fang is relatively fixed, so it can't grow particularly long. In all of them, they have a venom gland with muscles around it that can compress the gland, force the venom out under pressure through the venom duct to the top of the fang, down the fang, usually in an enclosed groove coming out near the tip. So they can control how much venom they eject. And these snakes can bite and leave a fang mark, but choose to inject no venom or only a tiny amount of venom. And that is why you can have what we call a dry bite, whereby there are bite marks, but the patient never develops medical problems from snake bite because the snake has not injected enough venom. As I said, this venom is used mainly in an offensive manner to acquire prey. And that's why it is very definitely a true venom. And here are some examples. This is amongst the elapid snakes, the Cobra family, Elapidae. Here's a classic cobra. This particular snake I did not photograph in your country. I photographed it in West Bengal. But this snake is the predominant cobra in Myanmar as well. This is the monocelate cobra, Naya Kauthia. Here you can see the fangs of a cobra, and here you can see the skull of an elapid. Now this is the skull of an Australian elapid snake, showing the fangs with the exit point for the venom near the tip of the fang. But notice there are many other teeth in the mouth of the snake. So when a venomous snake bites, the fangs are the ones, they're the longest, they are the most likely to leave fang marks, to leave tooth marks. But if it's a big snake and it really hangs on, you can get marks from these other rows of teeth as well. So the family Elapidae, the Cobra family, has about 360 species in many genera, and it includes all of the sea snakes. So sea snakes are Cobra type snakes. Most elapid snakes, most cobra-type snakes, have powerfully systemically acting venoms. Venoms that act throughout the body, not just at the bite site. But a few cobra-type snakes also have venom components that attack the bite area, causing tissue injury or necrosis. And that especially applies to the cobras in Asia, including Myanmar, and in Africa. There are a few cobras, and only amongst the cobras, that have modified their fangs so that the exit point at the tip of the fang faces forward. And they can squirt venom out over a 2 to 5 metre distance. They are the spitting cobras. Now, the major cobra in your country is the monocelate cobra, and this is not usually a spitting cobra. But the other species of cobra here, Mandalayensis, we think is probably a spitting species. So here are some key groups of elapid snakes throughout the world. As you can see, there are many different genera, many different problems. Some of them can cause local tissue injury at the bite site. Some cause, or many cause, paralysis. Some can cause major rhabdomyolysis. A few in Australia can cause coagulopathy, just like your vipers do. And a few can spit venom. But you'll look at this list and you say, well, how many of those are relevant to me? That's it. They're the ones that are relevant to you in Myanmar. The cobras, you do have king cobras here, you have kraits, and you have Asian coral snakes. Asian coral snakes are very, very unlikely to cause a medical problem. So really, amongst your major venomous snakes, the two that are most likely to cause bites that you have to treat are the cobras and the kraits. So how many people here have seen a cobra bite? Several of you. How many here have seen a krait bite? You've seen them, yeah. We are hearing very little about krait bites in your country, but we think that kraits are probably quite common. So we're not quite sure why you're seeing so few krait bites, because in the rest of Asia, in Southeast Asia to the east, in India to the west, kraits are a major problem. So we don't know why they're less of a problem in your country. We need to study and understand that more. King cobras, relatively rare as a cause of bites. So this is the range of elapid snakes, and in fact the biggest diversity is where I come from in Australia. And this is the range of sea snakes. They're found all around the waters of Myanmar. The Atractaspin snakes, the ones that I mentioned before in Africa and the Middle East, I'm not going to spend time. They have some very strange toxins that can cause cardiac problems. They're considered an important snakebite cause in parts of Africa. They can cause nasty local injuries, shock, cardiac collapse, but they're not found anywhere near Myanmar. Now we come to the vipers, and there are two groups. There are the standard vipers and the pit vipers. So we'll start with the standard vipers. This is a classic standard viper. This is the saw-scaled viper. This is Echis carinatus sokireki from the Indian subcontinent. It's a small snake, but it's very aggressive. It causes many severe snake bites. Here's a viper fang, and you can see the venom dripping off the fang. And that is a Russell's viper. That's what you're dealing with particularly in this hospital. This particular specimen was from West Bengal, so it's Russelli, but the local species looks just the same if you open up its mouth and get it to expose its fangs like that. And there you can see the fang structure. So there are two principal subfamilies. The viperins, which I just mentioned, the classic vipers and adders, and the pit vipers, which have these heat-sensing pits, and I'll show you a photo of that in a moment. They have even more species, more diversity. They're a very successful group of snakes. Vipers vary greatly in size, and even a small viper can be very dangerous. Classically, vipers in the textbooks, medical textbooks, have been described in the past as causing local necrosis, shock, and bleeding problems. In fact, this is not really quite true, because some vipers cause completely different problems to that. They can cause problems much more like a cobra. For example, in South America, rattlesnakes, which are a form of viper, a pit viper, cause problems similar to an Australian snake. They cause paralysis, muscle damage, and bleeding. They don't cause problems locally at all. So here's a pit viper. This one is from Asia. This is just to the north of you from China, the 100-pace snake. Does anyone know why it's called the 100-pace snake? Well, traditionally it's because it's thought that if you're bitten by this snake, you can take 100 paces and then you're dead. So there's the nostril that the snake breathes through, the nose, and there's the heat-sensing pit. There are two of them, one on each side, that gives the snake a stereoscopic heat vision, quite accurate heat vision. And you can see the range of vipers. They're wide-ranging throughout the world, but they're not found in New Guinea or Australia. So here are some key groups. These are the viperine vipers, the standard vipers. Many types, but there's only one type of importance to you, the one you're all familiar with, Russell's viper. For the pit vipers, however, a wider range. As I said, there are more species, and a number which are found in your country, and we don't know how many of these are important medically. We are fairly certain that the green pit vipers, the so-called green snakebite, is a common cause of snakebite and can cause major envenoming, particularly bleeding problems, just like a Russell's viper. But the other three genera, the habus, the mountain vipers, and the Malayan pit viper, are probably rare, limited distribution. We're not sure how much of a problem they actually cause. Lastly, identifying snakes. It is useful to know the snake involved. You may think, okay, every nasty snake bite I see, or almost every nasty snake bite, they say it's a Russell's viper. Why do I need to know beyond that? Well, there are some local snakes that look like Russell's viper, which are not Russell's viper. There are also snakes which cause some early features of snakebite that looks like a Russell's viper bite, but don't go on to cause some of the other problems and will not respond to the antivenoms you have available. So being able to work out what the snake is useful. What happens if someone brings the snake in with the patient? What do you do with the snake? Who throws the snake out? Who keeps the snake and preserves it in alcohol? At least one person. Well done. Thumbs up. If someone brings a snake in with the patient, don't throw it away. Preserve it in a jar with some ordinary 70% alcohol or something similar to that. Keep it, label it with the patient's UR number, a little bit of detail, and we as a project will start to collect those, and we hope to build up expertise amongst you and your colleagues so that you can take over when we no longer are here to identify these snakes and accurately match the snake with the patient. So the things that we use to identify the snake include the Midbody scale count. I'll tell you what that is in a minute. Anal and subcaudal scales. Gee, this is getting specialised, isn't it? Head structure, fang structure, coloration. Coloration is sometimes confusing. So it's very important to keep that snake, as I said. How do you do a mid-body scale count? You're not going to remember this, but you've got the handout. So if ever you need to do it, you can refer to that. A mid-body scale count is a midway along the body you count the number of scale rows, and there are several ways of doing it, as you can see there. When it asks for the anal or the subcaudal scales, the anal scale is the belly scale immediately before the cloaca, the part where the snake excretes, and then the subcaudals are those scales that follow, and they're either single or they're divided, as you can see there. Head scales, not even I remember the names of all these head scales. You have to refer to a diagram if you need to go to that level of detail. There is also venom detection available, but it's only available in Australia and New Guinea. It is something we're looking at. It's being looked at in several countries. Maybe it's something that can be looked at in this country down the track. But it uses usually an antibody process and an ELISA detection system to work out the type of snake involved. This is the system which we developed in Australia and is now being used in a number of different countries. It's been developed for each of those countries specifically. Diagnostic algorithms, where you look at the clinical features of the snake bite and try and track it down to a particular type of snake. And that's what we've tried to do for your country. We've produced these flowchart diagrams to help you work out what is the most likely snake for a particular clinical scenario and how to track that through to the way you treat that patient. Now, Sam is going to talk about this in more detail later today, so I'm not going to spend any more time on it now.